In police work, you rely on simple physics. A man cannot be in two places at once, but the St. James Hotel defied physics that night. We found the body of Elias Thorne in room 213, cold and stiff. The problem was, the night clerk, the register, and the undisturbed dust all confirmed one thing. Thorne walked into room 209, closed the door, and never came out. He died in a room that, by all logic, was completely empty. It was November 1984. I remember the month because the rain hadn't stopped for 3 days straight. It wasn't a clean rain. It was that cold, miserable drizzle that turns the city into a blurred painting of gray concrete and yellow headlights. I was working the night shift, nursing a lukewarm coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, when the call came in around 2 a.m. The dispatcher sounded bored. Possible DOA at the St. James Hotel, room 213. Manager says it's confusing. Confusing how? I asked, watching the windshield wipers fight a losing battle against the grime. Just get over there, Jack. He says the math doesn't add up. The St. James was one of those places that used to be elegant in the 50s but had slowly surrendered to rot. The neon sign outside flickered with a nervous buzz, illuminating the wet asphalt in rhythmic flashes of pink and darkness. I parked the cruiser, stepped into a puddle that went over the toe of my shoe, and adjusted my trench coat. Inside, the lobby smelled of floor wax and stale cigarette smoke. The night clerk, a thin man named Arthur with frantic eyes and a cheap polyester vest, was pacing behind the counter. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, but I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in mistakes, and I believe in lies. Detective Harlan, I said, showing my badge. Where's the body? Room 213, Arthur said, his voice trembling. But that's the problem, Detective. It can't be in 213. I looked at him. Is there a body or not? Yes, the maid, Elena. She went in to check a leak. She found him. But look at this. He slammed a heavy leather-bound guest ledger onto the counter. He pointed a shaking finger at the last entry. Elias Thorne. Checked in 11:15 p.m., room 209. I checked him in myself, Arthur insisted. I handed him the key to 209. I watched him walk up those stairs. I watched him turn left toward 209. And I've been here at this desk ever since. The stairs are right there. The elevator is broken. He never came back down, and he never walked past me to get to the other side of the hall. I leaned in, examining the handwriting. It was steady, firm. Maybe he just walked into the wrong room, Arthur. Arthur shook his head violently. Room 213 has been out of service for 2 weeks. The lock is jammed. It can only be opened with the master key, which was hanging right here until Elena took it 10 minutes ago. Mr. Thorne didn't have a key to 213. Nobody did. Stay with me until the end. The truth behind this case still unsettles me. It wasn't about violence. It was about the crumbling of logic. I took a breath. Let's go up. We walked up the stairs. The carpet was threadbare, damp with the humidity of the night. The hallway on the second floor was long and dim, lit by sconces that threw long, curved shadows against the peeling wallpaper. First, we went to room 209. This is where he went, Arthur whispered. I tried the handle. Locked. Arthur used his passkey. The door swung open into darkness. I clicked on the light. The room was pristine. The bed was made, the sheets tight enough to bounce a quarter off them, but on the luggage rack sat a brown leather suitcase. See, Arthur said. He's here. His bag is here. I walked over to the suitcase. It was unlatched. Inside were clothes, neatly folded, shirts, trousers, a shaving kit. On the nightstand, a glass of water sat half full, a small circle of condensation forming at the base. He checked in, I muttered. He unpacked. He poured a water. Before I tell you what happened next, please consider subscribing. It truly helps keep these stories alive. I checked the bathroom in 209. Dry sink, dry towels. All right, I said, stepping back out into the hall. Show me 203. Room 213 was 4 doors down, on the same side of the hallway. Between them were rooms 209 and 212. It was a straight shot. No turns, no alcoves. The door to 203 was open. A maid, Elna, sat on a chair in the hallway, weeping into a handkerchief. I nodded to her gently as I passed. Inside room 213, the air was colder. The radiator clanked aggressively in the corner. And there, sitting in the armchair by the window, was Elias Thorne. He was a man in his late 50s, wearing the trousers and dress shirt that matched the jacket hanging in the closet of room 209. His head was tipped back, eyes open, staring at the water-stained ceiling. His skin had that waxy gray pallor that tells you the spirit has long since vacated the premises. I put on my gloves and approached him. No blood, no signs of struggle. He looked peaceful, almost bored. I reached into his trouser pocket. I felt the cold bite of metal. I pulled it out. It was a brass key, attached to a plastic diamond tag. Room 209. I looked around the room. It was dusty. A fine layer of gray silt covered the dresser and the headboard. The bed was stripped to the mattress. This room hadn't been slept in. Arthur, I called out without turning around. You said this door was locked? Yes, detective. The lock is faulty. The tumblers are stuck. You need the master key, and you have to jiggle it hard to open it. Elena had to fight it to get in. I looked at the dead man. He had the key to 209 in his pocket. He was inside a room that required a master key to enter, a master key that had been at the front desk all night. What would you have done in my place? Would you have assumed the staff was lying to cover up a murder, or would you have started looking for a hidden entrance? I walked to the window. It was an old sash window, painted, shut with layers of white gloss that had yellowed with age. I ran my finger along the seal. Unbroken dust. This window hadn't been opened in years. We were on the second floor. The drop outside was 20 feet to a concrete alleyway filled with trash cans. I turned back to the body. Time of death? I mumbled to myself. He was cool to the touch, but rigor hadn't fully set in yet. Maybe 2-3 hours ago. That matched the check-in time. I checked his shoes. This was the detail that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. His shoes were dry. I looked at the carpet in room 213. It was dusty. If he had walked here from the lobby, his shoes would be wet from the rain outside. If he had walked here from room 209, he would have had to cross the hallway. I stepped back out into the hall. I knelt down, putting my face close to the floor. The hallway carpet was a dark maroon, hiding stains well, but I had my flashlight. Arthur, did anyone clean the hallway tonight? No, sir. Housekeeping leaves at 5. I shined the beam on the floor in front of room 209. I saw faint, damp footprints leading into 209. Then I shined the light down the hall toward 213. Nothing. The carpet nap was undisturbed. No muddy prints, no damp spots. What would you have done in my place? The physical evidence said he entered 209 and never left. The body said he was in 213. These two facts could not coexist. I stood up, my knees cracking slightly. The silence in the hallway was heavy, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. Who else is in the hotel? I asked, keeping my voice low. Only 2 other guests, Arthur said. Mr. Garris in 202 and a young couple in 215. But they've been quiet. 215? I looked down the hall. 2 finished and was past 213. So the couple would have had to walk past this door to get to their room. Yes, but they checked in at 6. They haven't come out. I walked back into 213 and stood over Elias Thorne. I checked his pockets again. Wallet, cash, $300, untouched, driver's license, no note, no weapon. Then I saw it. A small detail I had missed the first time. On the small round table beside the armchair where he sat dead, there was a matchbook. It was from a bar called the Blue Lantern. It was lying open. Inside, one match had been torn out, but there was no ashtray in the room, no smell of sulfur, no burnt matchstick on the floor. I looked at Arthur. Did he smoke? I don't know. I didn't see him smoke in the lobby. I bagged the matchbook. It was a small thing, but in a room that shouldn't contain a body, anything out of place was a scream in the dark. "Secure the floor," I told the rookie who had just arrived, shaking the rain off his uniform. "Nobody leaves, nobody enters. And get the coroner. I want to know exactly what stopped this man's heart." I walked back to the threshold of the room. I looked at the door latch of 213. I examined the metal closely. There were scratches on the strike plate. Old ones, sure, but some looked fresh. Shiny? Someone had forced this door, but not from the hallway. The scratches were on the inside of the frame. I felt a cold drop of sweat slide down my back. "Arthur," I said, turning to the pale clerk, "you said the lock was jammed and could only be opened with a master key." "That's right." "Then how?" I pointed to the scratches. "Did someone try to pry it open from the inside?" Arthur's eyes went wide. I don't know." The rain hammered against the glass, harder now, like it was trying to get in. I had a dead man in a sealed room, a locked room with no key, and a timeline that was physically impossible. I lit a cigarette, breaking my own rule about smoking at crime scenes. I needed to think, and the smoke swirling in the stagnant air of room 213 seemed to form shapes that I wasn't ready to interpret. The night was just beginning, and I had the distinct feeling that Elias Thorne wasn't the only one who had walked into a trap. The hallway seemed to stretch longer as I stared at those scratches on the inside of the door frame. They were frantic, jagged marks, stripping away the paint to reveal the raw wood beneath. They weren't the marks of a man trying to fix a lock. They were the marks of a man trying to claw his way out of a coffin. I turned to the rookie, Officer Miller, who was looking a little green around the gills. "Get the photographer up here, and tell the coroner to hurry. I want to know if there are wood splinters under Thorne's fingernails." I stepped back out into the hall. The air was thick, smelling of wet wool and old secrets. I looked at room 215, the only other occupied room on this corridor. I buttoned my coat and walked over, knuckles rapping softly on the wood. A muffled voice came from inside. "Who is it?" "Detective Harlan, homicide. Open up, please." The door cracked open, held by a chain. A young man, maybe 25, peered out. Behind him, a woman sat on the bed, pulling a sheet up to her neck. They looked terrified, but not guilty. Just two kids caught in a bad place on a bad night. "Did you hear anything?" I asked, keeping my voice level, the way you talk to a spooked horse. "Between 11 p.m. and now?" The young man hesitated. "We heard, the plumbing. The pipes bang in these old places. Anything else? Footsteps? Voices?" The woman spoke up from the bed. "I heard humming." I frowned. "Humming?" "About midnight," she said. "It was low. A man's voice. It was coming from the hallway. It sounded happy. And then I heard a click, like a heavy latch." "Did you look out?" "No," the young man cut in. "We mind our own business." I thanked them and told them to stay put. Humming. A happy man in a hallway of death. It didn't fit. Thorne didn't look like a man who hummed. He looked like a man who worried. What would you have done in my place? A witness hears a happy man, but we have a dead body in a sealed room. Would you trust the ear of a frightened tourist or the silence of the evidence? I walked back to the maid, Elena. She had stopped crying and was now staring at the floor, shredding a tissue into white confetti. "Elena," I said, crouching down to be at eye level. "You found the body. Why did you go into room 213? You knew it was out of service." She looked up, her eyes red. "I heard the water running. I thought a pipe burst. The manager, Mr. Arthur, he hates water damage. I used the master key to check." "But the sink is dry," I said. "I checked it. I thought I heard it," she stammered. "Maybe it was the radiator." I stood up. A lie or a mistake? In my experience, fear makes people stupid, but guilt makes them precise. She was too vague to be guilty, I thought. At least that was my first assumption. I went back to room 209, the room Thorne should have been in. I walked to the window. It looked out over the same alleyway as 213. The rain was slashing against the glass now, distorting the world outside. I looked at the floor. The wet footprints I had seen earlier were starting to fade into the carpet, drying out. But something bothered me about the suitcase. I put my gloves back on and started rifling through the clothes. Standard business wear. No personal photos, no diary. But tucked in the side pocket of the suitcase was a receipt. City garage. Parking ticket. 10:45 p.m. He parked his car 45 minutes before checking in. Where was he for that missing hour? The hotel was only 10 minutes from the garage. I walked over to the phone in the room and dialed the operator. "Get me the address for the Blue Lantern from the matchbook I found, and run a plate on a 1980 Ford sedan registered to Elias Thorne." While I waited, I went to the bathroom in 209 again. I turned the tap. The pipes groaned, a loud metallic shudder that vibrated through the floor. It was loud enough to be heard in 215, so the couple wasn't lying about the plumbing. But then I saw it. On the rim of the bathtub in room 209, a single, long, dark hair. Thorne was balding. Arthur was short-haired. This was a woman's hair. I bagged it. "Stay with me. The timeline is about to break." I went back down to the lobby. Arthur was behind the desk, pretending to read a newspaper, but his eyes weren't moving. "Arthur," I said, leaning on the high counter. "Who cleaned 209 before Thorne checked in?" "Elena did, this morning." "Is Elena the only maid?" "Yes. Does she have dark hair?" Arthur paused. "No. Elena is blonde. You saw her." I nodded. "So who has long dark hair and access to room 209? Arthur swallowed hard. "I don't know, Detective. Maybe a guest from before?" "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe Thorne wasn't alone." Just then, the phone at the front desk rang. Arthur jumped. He reached for it, but I put my hand on the receiver. "I'll get that," I said. I lifted the heavy plastic handset. St. James Hotel. There was silence on the other end. Not dead air. Live silence. The kind where you can hear someone breathing, listening to the rain on their end. "Who is this?" I asked. A voice, distorted and low, crackled through the line. "Is he cold yet?" "Who is this?" I repeated, my grip tightening on the phone. "You're looking in the wrong room, Detective. Check the basement." Click. The dial tone hummed in my ear, mocking me. I hung up and looked at Arthur. "Is there a basement?" "Yes," he whispered. "Storage, boiler room, but it's flooded. We haven't been down there in months." "Show me." What would you have done? An anonymous tip is usually a trap, but when you have a dead body that defies physics, you follow the rabbit hole even if it's flooded. Arthur led me to a heavy iron door behind the reception desk. He fumbled with a key ring, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice. "Open it, Arthur." He unlocked it. The smell hit me instantly. Stagnant water, rust, and something sweet. Rotting flowers? We descended the concrete steps. The water at the bottom was ankle deep. The single bulb overhead swung slightly from the draft, casting swaying shadows against the brick walls. "Stay here," I told Arthur. I waded into the water. It was freezing. My flashlight cut through the gloom. Old chairs stacked like skeletons, boxes of moldy files. And then, in the corner, near the massive boiler, I saw a chair. It was a wooden chair bolted to the floor, and on the ground next to it were ropes. Cut ropes. I knelt down, ignoring the icy water soaking my trousers. I shined the light on the ropes. They were fresh. The ends weren't frayed. They were sliced clean. I looked at the floor around the chair. In the mud and silt of the basement floor there were footprints, 2 sets, 1 set of heavy boots, and 1 set of smooth-soled dress shoes. I followed the dress shoe prints. They led away from the chair towards a small service hatch in the wall. A dumbwaiter, an old industrial laundry lift. I opened the hatch. It was small, tight, barely big enough for a man. I shined my light up the shaft. The cables were greased. Recently greased. I looked up. The shaft went straight up. "Arthur," I called out, my voice echoing off the damp walls. "Where does this shaft open?" It opens on every floor," Arthur stammered from the stairs, "in the linen closets. But it's welded shut. It hasn't worked since 1960. I looked back at the footprints. The man in the dress shoes had walked to the dumbwaiter, but there were no prints walking back. I realized then that Elias Thorne hadn't just walked into the wrong room. He had been moved through the veins of the hotel like a piece of dirty laundry, but that didn't explain the dry shoes in room 213, or the locked door. I waded back to the stairs. My mind was racing. If Thorne was brought up the shaft, who opened the welded door, and why put him in 213? As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw Officer Miller running toward me across the lobby. "Detective, you need to see this. The coroner moved the body." And he found something under the chair Thorne was sitting in. I hurried back up the stairs, my wet pant legs slapping against my ankles. We went back into room 213. The body was in a body bag now, but the armchair was moved. Beneath it, hidden by the skirt of the chair, was a small, frantic message scratched into the floorboards. It wasn't wood scratches this time. It was written in chalk. Taylor's chalk. 29 is a lie. I stared at the words. After this, there was no turning back for me, because I recognized the handwriting. It matched the signature in the guest ledger perfectly. Elias Thorne had been alive in this room. He had been trapped. He had known about 209, and he had left a message. But if he was trapped in here, how did he get the key to 209 into his own pocket? And then the lights in the hotel flickered and died. Total darkness. "Miller," I shouted. "I'm here, sir. Don't move. Flashlights only." I clicked my beam on. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. "Someone cut the power," I said, drawing my service revolver. The weight of the steel felt reassuring in my hand, but I knew bullets couldn't shoot logic holes. "Arthur," I said to the darkness, "where's the breaker box?" Silence. "Arthur?" I swung the light into the hallway. The clerk was gone. But down the hall, near the stairwell, I saw the flare of a match, a single, small flame. It held for a second, illuminating a face. It wasn't Arthur. It was a man with a scarred face, wearing a long gray coat. He smiled, blew out the match, and the darkness swallowed him whole. I didn't yell. You don't yell in the dark when you're hunting. It gives away your position. I moved forward, keeping my flashlight beam low and sweeping the floor. The hallway was a tunnel of black fog. The rain outside had turned into a deluge, the thunder shaking the window panes like a fist against glass. I reached the spot where the match had flared. The air smelled of sulfur and something else, cheap cologne, Old Spice, and stale sweat. "Miller," I whispered into my radio. "Watch the back exit. I have a suspect moving toward the stairwell." I swung my light toward the stairs. The heavy fire door was swinging shut, the hydraulic arm hissing softly. I pushed through it, my revolver raised. The concrete stairwell was cold, echoing with the sound of my own heartbeat. I looked down. Nothing. I looked up. 3 floors up, a shadow detached itself from the railing and slipped through the door to the roof. What would you have done? Chase a ghost onto a slick roof in a storm, or secure the crime scene below? I made a choice. I didn't go up, I went down. If he was on the roof, he was trapped. If I left the floor unsecured, the evidence, and the truth, would disappear. I ran back to the breaker box in the utility closet near the lobby. The door was ajar. I shined my light inside. Arthur, the night clerk, was slumped against the panel. He wasn't dead, but he was close to it. A nasty gash on his forehead was bleeding sluggishly. I checked his pulse. Weak, but steady. "Arthur," I said, shaking him. "Who hit you?" He groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at me, pupils dilated. The guest," he wheezed. "Which guest, Arthur?" "The one who doesn't check out." I helped him sit up. "The man with the scar?" Arthur froze. Fear, sharp and primal, cut through his concussion. "You saw him? You saw Julian?" "Who is Julian?" "The owner's son," Arthur whispered, gripping my sleeve. "He's supposed to be in prison. He swore he'd burn this place down if he ever came back." I left Arthur with a paramedic who had just arrived and stormed back to the front desk. The lights flickered and buzzed back to life, casting the lobby in that sickly yellow hue again. I needed to know who Elias Thorne really was. A businessman doesn't get targeted by an ex-con living in the walls. The phone rang. It was the precinct. "Jack?" The sergeant's voice was tense. "We ran Thorne's plates and his background. You need to hear this." "Go ahead." Elias Thorne isn't a sales rep. He's a forensic accountant for the state. He specializes in bankruptcy fraud. He was sent to the St. James to audit the books. Rumor is the hotel is a front for laundering cash for the Luciano family. I hung up. The picture was shifting. Thorne wasn't a random victim. He was a hunter who became the prey. Stay with me. The logic is about to flip. I went back up to the second floor. The hallway felt different now, malicious. I walked to room 215, the young couple, the ones who heard the humming. I knocked. No answer. I knocked harder. "Police! Open up!" Silence. I used the master key I had taken from Arthur's belt. I pushed the door open. Room 215 was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of life. The bed was made. The towels were untouched. There was no luggage, no coats. The young couple hadn't been guests. They were plants, lookouts. I walked into their room. It shared a wall with room 213 where the body was found. I pressed my ear to the wall. It sounded hollow. I looked at the layout. 215, 213. I went to the closet in 215. I pushed the coats aside. The back panel of the closet looked normal, wood grain paneling. But near the floor, there was a scuff mark, a semicircle scratch on the floorboards. I pushed on the panel. It clicked. A hidden latch released. The panel swung inward. I shined my light into the gap. It was a narrow service chase running between the rooms. Plumbing pipes ran vertically, hissing with steam. But there was enough space for a man to walk, and there, wedged between the pipes, was a gray wool coat. I pulled it out. It was heavy, wet. I checked the pockets. A gun, a snub-nose .38, and a set of keys. Not hotel keys, car keys, and a keychain with a small photo of a little girl. I recognized the coat. It matched the description of the suit Elias Thorne was wearing in the photo on his driver's license. But wait, if Thorne's coat was here, hidden in the wall, and his body was in 2I13 and his suitcase was in 209. I stepped back, the pieces clattering around in my head, refusing to fit. "Miller!" I shouted. The rookie came running up the hall. "Get Elena, now! Don't let her leave the building." I ran back to room 213. The dead man. I looked at him again, really looked at him. I had assumed he was Elias Thorne because his wallet was in his pocket, because he was in the hotel. I looked at the face of the corpse. Then I pulled out the driver's license I had bagged earlier. The photo on the license was a man with a thick mustache and heavy glasses. The man in the chair was clean-shaven. He had marks on his nose where glasses should have been, but he wasn't wearing any. "He was shaved," I whispered to the empty room. Someone had shaved him post-mortem. I looked closely at the jawline. Razor burn. Fresh nicks. This wasn't just a murder. This was a theater production. After this, there was no turning back for me. I heard a scream from the stairwell. I drew my weapon and ran. Elena was struggling with Officer Miller halfway down the stairs. She was clawing at his face, trying to get to the back door. "Let her go," I barked. Miller stepped back, hand on his holster. Elena collapsed against the railing, sobbing. "He made me do it," she wailed. "Julian, he said he'd kill my mother if I didn't help." I grabbed her shoulders, hauling her up. "Help with what, Elena? Tell me." "The switch," she screamed. "We had to do the switch." "What switch?" "The rooms, the numbers." I froze. I looked up the stairwell at the brass numbers screwed into the doors of the hallway. 1, 1, 2 on 13. "You switched the numbers on the doors?" I asked, my voice low. "No," she sobbed. "Not the doors. The furniture." My mind reeled. "Julian, he knew the accountant was coming," she stammered. "He knew Thorne would check for the hidden safe in the manager's office. But Julian needed time to move the money, so when Thorne checked in, go on." "Thorne did go into room 209, she said. "He walked in, he unpacked, he drank water. Then how did he end up dead in 213? "He didn't," she whispered. "He died in 209. We moved him to 213 afterward to confuse you, to buy time." "That doesn't make sense," I snapped. "If he died in 209, why move him? Why create a mystery?" "Because," she looked at me with terrified eyes, "the man in the chair isn't Elias Thorne." The thunder clapped outside, shaking the very foundation of the St. James. "What?" "Thorne is the one who ran," she whispered. "The man in the chair. That's Julian." I let go of her. I stepped back, my back hitting the cold wall. The dead man was the killer? "If that's Julian," I pointed up the stairs, "then who is the man with the scar I saw in the hallway?" Elena's face went white. "You saw a man with a scar?" "Yes," lighting a match. "Julian didn't have a scar," she whispered. "Julian was handsome. That's why he was vain. That's why he shaved before he—" She trailed off. "If the dead man is Julian," I said, "and Thorne is the accountant, then Thorne is the one running around in the dark," I realized, "and he wasn't the victim. He was the one hunting them." I turned to Miller. "Lock the exits, all of them. The killer isn't escaping. He's trapped in here with us." I ran back up the stairs, 2 at a time. I needed to look at the body again. I needed to see the hands. I burst into room 213. The body bag was there. I unzipped it. I grabbed the dead man's hand. I turned it over. Calluses, rough, thick skin on the fingertips. The hands of a man who worked manual labor, or the hands of a man who climbed ropes in a dumbwaiter shaft for years. This was Julian, So where was Elias Thorne? And then I saw it. The closet door in room 213, which had been closed when I first arrived, was now cracked open an inch, and from the darkness of the closet, the smell of cigarette smoke drifted out, the same smoke from the blue lantern matchbook. I raised my gun. "Come out, Mr. Thorne," I said to the closet. The door creaked open slowly. A man stepped out. He was holding a silenced pistol. He wore the glasses from the ID photo. He looked calm, professional. "You're a sharp one, Detective," Thorne said. "I was hoping you'd chase the ghost on the roof a little longer." He wasn't an accountant, or if he was the kind who subtracted people, not numbers. "Drop the gun," I said. "I can't do that, Jack." He smiled, and it was the coldest smile I'd ever seen. "I haven't balanced the books yet." I didn't move. The barrel of Thorne's silencer was a black eye staring unblinkingly at my chest. The room smelled of rain and that sharp, coppery scent of adrenaline. "You're a professional," I said, keeping my hands where he could see them, palms open. "Which means you don't kill a police detective unless you have to. It brings too much heat." Thorne adjusted his glasses. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're right, Jack. I prefer clean ledgers, but you've made a mess of my audit." "Julian was the thief," I said, piecing it together aloud. I needed to keep him talking. I needed Miller to hear us from the hallway. "Julian was skimming money from the Luciano family using this hotel. You weren't sent here to audit the books. You were sent to close the account." Thorne nodded slightly. "Julian was greedy. He thought he could hide in a rotting hotel, skimming off the top, and no one would notice. But the family always notices." "What would you have done? A man with a gun and a confession is standing in front of you. Do you rush him, or do you let him brag until he makes a mistake?" "So walk me through it," I said, leaning casually against the dresser, though my legs felt like lead. "Because the physics still don't work. The body in the chair, Julian, had dry shoes, but the footprints in 209 were wet, and the door to this room was locked from the inside." Thorne chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound. "Physics is easy, Detective. People are hard." "Julian never left the hotel," Thorne began. "He lived in room 209. It was his command center. He had peepholes drilled into the walls to watch the guest in 209 and 211. He was paranoid. He knew we were coming. So when you checked in, I knew he was watching," Thorne said. "I checked into 209 loud and clear. I let Arthur see me. I let him give me the key. I walked in, unpacked, and poured a water. I played the part of the tired businessman. But you didn't stay in 209. No, I turned on the shower to cover the noise. Then I opened the access panel behind the bathroom mirror. Old hotels always have service chases. I didn't go down to the basement, Jack. I went across." I nodded. "To room 2113. Exactly. Julian was sitting in that armchair, watching 209 through a spy hole, waiting for his goons to come gas me in my sleep. He never heard me come out of his own closet." The image clicked into place, the hunter becoming the prey in his own safe house. "You killed him," I said, quietly. "Garrot," Thorne said, tapping his pocket. "Clean. No blood." "And then you tried to become him?" "No." Thorne shook his head. "I tried to make him become me. That was the improvisation. I realized if Elias Thorne died in this hotel, the family would stop looking for me. I could take Julian's skimmed cash, which is in the wall safe behind you, by the way, and disappear." "So you shaved him?" I said, looking at the body bag. "You tried to make him look like you." "He had the same build." Thorne shrugged. "I shaved his beard. I put my wallet in his pocket. I put the key to 209 in his trousers to link him to my room. I was going to leave him in 209, in my bed. But you didn't move him to 209, I said. Why? Thorne's face hardened. Because Arthur and the maid, Elena, came up too early. They were coming to kill me. I heard them in the hall. I was trapped in 213 with a fresh corpse. So you locked the door, I said. I jammed it. I scratched the strike plate to make it look like a break-in, to confuse the timeline. I needed you to be confused. I needed a mystery so I could slip away in the chaos. The scratches on the inside, I muttered. And the happy man humming? Me, Thorne admitted. Adrenaline makes me hum. Bad habit. And the man with the scar I saw in the hall? The one lighting the match? Thorne smirked. He reached up and peeled a strip of latex from his cheek. Theatrical putty. I needed to scare Arthur into silence. He thought he was seeing a ghost of a hitman from the past. It kept him disoriented. It was brilliant in a twisted way. He had played everyone, the staff, the mob, and the police, against each other using the architecture of the hotel. But you made one mistake, Thorne, I said softly. He raised an eyebrow. The gun didn't waver. And what's that? You got greedy, just like Julian. You stayed for the money. I pointed to the wall safe behind me. You could have walked out an hour ago, but you had to get the cash. I have the cash. Thorne patted his coat. And now I'm leaving. You're going to handcuff yourself to that radiator, detective. He tossed a pair of cuffs at my feet. They clattered on the wooden floor. Stay with me. This is where gravity takes over. I bent down slowly to pick up the cuffs. As I did, I looked at the floorboards. I saw the faint chalk mark Julian had made. 209 is a lie. And I saw something else. A small copper wire running along the baseboard, stripped and bare. The hotel was old. The wiring was garbage. And the radiator I was standing next to was leaking steam, making the floor damp. Put them on, Thorne commanded, taking a step forward. He stepped right onto the damp wood where the wire was exposed. I can't do that, Elias, I said. I kicked the radiator. Hard. The pipes shuddered. The vibration shook the floorboards. The loose wire shifted, just a fraction, and touched the metal of the radiator leg. Crack. It wasn't a gunshot. It was the sound of 110 volts of electricity shorting through water and copper. Thorne convulsed. His muscles locked up instantly. The gun flew from his hand, sliding across the floor. He collapsed, twitching, his eyes rolling back. The lights in the room blew out with a pop, plunging us into darkness again. Miller, I shouted, diving for the gun. The door burst open. Flashlight beams cut through the smoke. Miller was there, weapon drawn, with 2 uniformed officers behind him. Jack, you okay? I fumbled on the floor, my hand closing around the cold steel of Thorne's silencer. I aimed it at the writhing shape on the floor, but it wasn't necessary. Thorne was out cold, smoke rising from the soles of his expensive Italian shoes. I'm fine, I breathed, standing up and brushing the dust off my knees. Secure him, and be careful. He's got a shocking personality. Miller groaned at the joke, but I saw the relief in his face. We dragged Thorne out into the hallway. Under the emergency lights, he looked small. Just a middle-aged man in a gray suit who thought he could outsmart the truth. I walked back into room 213. I looked at the body of Julian one last time. The mystery was solved. The impossible locked room was just a hiding spot. The wrong room was a trap, and the ghost was just a man with a greed problem. I walked over to the closet where Thorne had been hiding. Inside, I found a leather satchel. I opened it. Stack after stack of $100 bills. Julian Skim, I closed the bag. Arthur was being led away in handcuffs downstairs, weeping about how he was forced to help. Elena was sitting on the stairs, silent, staring at nothing. I lit a cigarette. My hands were shaking, just a little. You never get used to having a gun pointed at your heart. I walked down the stairs, the satchel in one hand, the evidence in the other. The rain had stopped. The silence of the hotel was returning, heavy and final. But as I reached the lobby, I realized there was one loose thread: the phone call. The tip about the basement. Thorne didn't make that call. He was busy killing Julian. Julian didn't make it. He was dead. Arthur and Elena were terrified, so who called me and told me to check the basement? I walked to the front desk and looked at the call log. There was no record of an incoming call at 2:30 a.m. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp night air. I walked out to my cruiser. The city was waking up. Delivery trucks were rumbling. Garbage trucks were grinding. The noir fantasy was fading into the gray reality of morning. I looked back at the St. James Hotel. The neon sign was finally off. Sometimes in this job you get the killer, you get the motive, and you get the weapon. But there's always one piece left over, one piece that doesn't fit in the box. I started the engine. The wipers scraped across the dry glass. Case closed, I whispered, but I didn't believe it. The sun didn't rise that morning, so much as the darkness just gave up and faded into a bruised purple bruise over the skyline. I sat at my desk in the precinct, the steam from a styrofoam cup of coffee rising into the fluorescent light. My clothes still smelled of that hotel: damp wool, old dust, and the ozone scent of fried electrical wiring. Across the room, in the holding cell, Elias Thorne, or whatever his real name was, sat in silence. He hadn't said a word since he woke up. He didn't need to. The satchel of cash, the silenced pistol, and the dead body of Julian in room 213 did all the talking for him. But I wasn't looking at Thorne. I was looking at a cassette tape sitting on my desk. It was the recording of the call that had come into the station. The anonymous tip that had sent me to the basement. The voice that asked, "Is he cold yet?" I played it back. The voice was low, distorted, probably through a handkerchief, but this time, in the quiet of the station, without the rain hammering against the roof, I heard the background noise on the tape. Thump hiss. Thump hiss. It was the sound of the St. James Hotel's plumbing, the steam pipes expanding. I realized then who had called me. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a rival mobster watching from the street. It was the young couple in room 215. They weren't tourists. They weren't innocent bystanders. They were the supervisors. The Luciano family hadn't just sent Thorne to clean up the mess. They had sent insurance. When Thorne started going off script, killing Julian, shaving the body, trying to steal the money for himself, the couple next door heard everything through the thin walls. They heard the plan. They knew Thorne was going to run with the cash. They couldn't take him in a straight fight. Thorne was a professional killer. So they did the next best thing. They used me. They called the police, dropped the tip about the basement to keep me investigating, and then slipped out the back while I was busy chasing shadows. They weaponized the law to take out a traitor they couldn't handle themselves. I rubbed my eyes. In this job, you get used to being the hero, the villain, or the victim. But it's a bitter pill to swallow when you realize you were just the janitor, called in to clean up a spill between criminals. Stay with me. The final lesson of this case is the hardest one. The legal fallout was messy, as these things always are. Arthur, the night clerk, took a plea deal. He got 5 years for accessory to murder and fraud. He was a weak man, not an evil one. He had just been in the wrong place for too long, and eventually the rot of the hotel had seeped into his bones. I visited him once in prison. He looked better, actually. The fear was gone from his eyes. He told me that for the first time in 20 years he slept through the night because he knew exactly who was on the other side of the door. Elena, the maid, got probation. She testified against the Luciano organization. She moved out west to Arizona. I got a postcard from her a few years later. No words, just a picture of a desert cactus. Dry, clean, far away from the rain and the damp carpets of the St. James. As for Elias Thorne, he never made it to trial. He was found dead in his cell 3 weeks after the arrest. Natural causes, the report said. But I saw the photos. His neck was swollen. The family has a long reach, and they don't like auditors who try to cook the books for themselves. And the hotel? The St. James stood empty for another year, a hollow tooth in the city's jaw. The windows were boarded up. The neon sign was smashed by vandals. One night, about a year after the case, I drove past it. It was raining again, naturally. I parked across the street and just watched the building. I thought about the wrong room. We focus so much on the physical evidence, the keys, the locks, the footprints. But the real mystery wasn't about room 209 or room 213. It was about the rooms we build inside our heads. Julian built a room of paranoia, a fortress where he thought he was safe, only to be strangled in his own sanctuary. Thorne built a room of arrogance, thinking he could outsmart physics and rewrite reality, only to be brought down by a loose wire and a wet floorboard. And me? I was in a room too. A room of assumptions. I assumed the victim was a victim. I assumed the witnesses were innocent. I assumed the voice on the phone was trying to help me. I walked into the case thinking I was the hunter, never realizing I was just a piece on the board being moved by players I couldn't see. I lit a cigarette, the smoke curling up against the cold glass of my windshield. That case changed how I worked. I stopped looking for the how immediately. The how is just mechanics, levers, pulleys, forgotten dumbwaiters, shaved faces. Any magician can do the how. I started looking for the why, because the why is where the human error lives. Thorne didn't die because he slipped on a floorboard. He died because he was greedy. He stopped to gloat. He stopped to collect the cash. If he had just walked out, he would be sipping cocktails in Rio, but he couldn't leave the room he had built for himself. The St. James was demolished in 1986. They put up a parking garage. Sometimes, when I park there to go to the courthouse, I look at the concrete pillars. I wonder if they're in the same spot where the elevator shaft used to be. I wonder if the ghosts of Julian and his unfinished business are still stuck between the floors. But then I shake my head. There are no ghosts, just people, making bad choices in dark rooms, hoping the door will open before the air runs out. I finished my cigarette and flicked it into a puddle. It hissed and died instantly. That's the thing about detective work. You don't solve the world. You just tidy up the corners. You put the bad guys in boxes, you write the reports, and you go home to a house that's a little too quiet. Elias Thorne died in the wrong room, but in a way I think he was exactly where he belonged. That's the story. It wasn't supernatural. It wasn't a monster. It was just a man who thought he could trick death by switching a number on a ledger. But death doesn't read ledgers, and it doesn't need a key. Thank you for listening to this case file. It's one I've carried in my pocket for a long time, like a heavy coin I can't spend. And what's the strangest case you ever heard of? I'd like to read your stories in the comments.